Hi everybody, Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero, John Lenhart. Hi John.
Hi.
Now, the last video we put out was, the uniqueness of bigger systems, i.e. countries, companies, these type of things. Now, today, it's going to be exciting because I've been waiting for this one. It's the thought processes of the bigger systems. Now, this is something that's going to be new to me today as well, so I'm excited to learn. So, John, please tell us a bit more about the thought processes.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the stuff we've talked about previously, which is humans physiologically sync their thought processes.
Yes.
So that's important to realize. When we train these teachers, we focus on helping them be their best self. They are resilient because that reaches the students more than the information.
Of course.
If you're not in a good spot, if you're at what we call 160, and I'm going to go through these thought processes. If you're at what we call 160 and you have the best information in the world, it doesn't matter. The kid's there. So I want to briefly go through these thought processes. We call one of them 10. Some people like to call that intuition, but 10 is where you're creative.
Yep.
10 is your unconscious brain working at its best. 80 is where you're conscious. You're focused, you're very conscious, you're in control. That's called self-regulation. Yep. We call one 160. That's this habitual thought process. Some people call it an animal thought process. It's called regulation. And this is where people are drifting and have a lot of thoughts, and we could call those zombies. Then we have 320, which is where people trigger. That's called dysregulation. So if you think about it, what happens is with a team, with any kind of group, if somebody comes into that group, and we've used this analogy, if I'm at 80, I'm focused, and someone walks up at 160 trying to be distracting, I'm either going to go down to 160 and become distracted, and they've distracted me. We see this in classrooms all the time. One kid distracts the other kid. Or I can help the distracted kid up to 80. They're focused. Or if I don't come down to 160 and they don't come up, they'll get frustrated. They'll trigger and go to 320.
Yeah.
So that's what's really going on. When you're looking at people, humans have this ability to sync their thought processes and feel this stress. When groups do this, we see this all the time. So when a group syncs up at 320, this is a mob. This is when you have chaos. Somebody throws something or breaks something, and then everybody starts destroying everything. And it's like, we call it mob mentality.
Yeah.
When people sync at 320, it's mob mentality.
Yeah. So before all the madness that's happened in the world started, I used to run a meditation class, for beginners and people who just like to come together just to get into that space. Now, I was working with kind of vice presidents for banking. I was working with people that played golf. They all had totally different way of life. And you used to speak to them during the week, oh, I'm stressed out, or this is going here and this is happening. And they all used to come in and they all used to take their space and they always take it into their own little space. And I was the one that was between 10 and 80. I was the one kind of toggling. So I'd be focused on doing it and then talking to them again through intuition, through the 10 process, speaking to them and understanding, vibing them, feeling them. And then what would happen is everyone would be brought up to 80 from where they were at 160. Nobody would ever come in at 320. But because of the different music, the frequency that we were using and the way that I was talking, feeling them, understanding them, it just kind of brought everyone up to that nice kind of higher state. So I totally get what you're talking about in terms of the thought processes. It's brilliant.
Right. So when everybody syncs at that, that's zombies. All these zombie movies are about people being 160. And if you act at 80, the zombies come and they know you're different. That's really what those movies are about, is 160 is zombie, and people start becoming zombies and getting on their phones. And that kind of feels, that's what people are like when they're 180. Everybody's just drifting. Or 160, I should say. At 80, people are focused. This is where the teachers want them in the classroom. This is where, when you're having a discussion, an intentional discussion, or you're teaching, you want the whole room at 80. So there are certain techniques. You ask people a question. You ask the group a question. There's certain techniques to get everybody at 80. And then 10, you can't live at 10, but you flow. at 10. We can see 10 as flow. So what you were talking about is getting people into flow. We talk about that as getting people into flow is for sports. They're in the zone. There's a way to get the whole team in the zone. And what you do is you have one or two people who are in the zone, and then everybody sinks into them. That's a lot of what Michael Jordan used to do in basketball is he's in the zone and he'd get his players to sink into him. And then the whole team was in the zone. So those are smaller groups of people on what it looks like when a group, when you're having a sing along with people, you're in flow.
Yeah.
And it's enjoyable and it's energetic and we're all singing together. Or if you're watching a sporting event and your team is doing well and you all start cheering, it feels so great. The team's in flow, you're in flow, and it's a magical moment.
Yeah. Sorry, so I was just going to say there, so when you're talking about Michael Jordan, he's obviously in flow so he trains and he's trained harder than most because he's on that pedestal, he's put there. So he's getting no other choice apart from to live up to this stardom. And this is what you usually find. So people will look up to him because he's put so many years in, so much effort in, and that's why they want to be where he is. And I feel that's where, they would kind of take that on. So when he speaks, it's like they want to listen. They'll give that focus, and then there'll be the truth, and then touching on to their own intuition, their own 10. Then they'll come back out and listen to him. Then they'll go back inside, and then they'll go back out. And we do it with kind of sports teams and stuff like that as well here, even with the football. But we spoke about in a previous video, when it gets to the point where we're talking to them, we've still got to vibe that in order to get them. It sometimes takes a season. So sometimes it takes longer to bring people into that place of us talking.
Right. So understanding those 4 thought processes help you vibe that, to have words for that, because everybody is in only one of those 4 thought processes. So now that we understand that, now we understand to vibe it, what would it look like for that to continue spreading? Because again, I could be at a certain thought process, you and I could be at a certain thought process, we get synced up, and then groups of people get synced up, then communities, and then nations, and then the world. So what I want to do is to introduce this concept, I want to tell you a little story, is back in the late 90s, I saw this write-up of a book called The Fourth Turning.
Okay.
And this book made the case. So this was while I was working on the model for the brain. This book made the case that every 20 to 22 or so years, the world goes through a turning. The world goes through another, I would say, thought process.
Yeah.
And it goes through 4 of them, and then it repeats. And if you think about it, what I talk about is somebody could be focused at 80, and then what happens is they get tired of focusing and they go to 160, and then something happens and they trigger and go to 320, and then they do something really bad and have this epiphany and then come back up to 10.
Yeah.
And then they're at 10 and they start taking control and go to 80. And then there's a natural progression with these thought processes through experience. What you and I have tried to do is get people through understanding to go the other way. So through experience, you're going to go 80, 160, 320, and then hurt yourself or somebody else, or have this epiphany to 10. You and I have been trying to say, hey, why don't we go 160, 80 to flow intentionally? That's all you and I have been offering people, is an intentional path to a better thought process. Because if you don't do what we're talking about, you're naturally going to go the other way.
Yeah.
Well, the book said the world naturally goes through these other ways, and every 80 to 90 years, it goes through a full turning. This book said that there's going to be this catastrophic event early in the 2000s, and it's going to cause the ushering in of this 4th turning. Well, 2001, 9/11 happened, and all this stuff happened. So now let's look at these 4 turnings, and let's look at the time in the history. Okay, so the first,
for a second, please, just I had to get this out. It's every 100 years is a pandemic, and it can be traced right back to 1620. So 100 years, then they had the Black Plague, they had such and such, and it all goes back. So what you're saying, people can literally Go and look. All they have to do is look at every 100 years there was a pandemic, and there's some sort of way of working that takes people back. And just while we're on the subject, people can literally drop. You hear there's so many people saying there was nowhere else I could go but up. I reached rock bottom. I couldn't go any further down. And then what happens is bang. But what, as you just quite rightly said, you and I can help people at 160 get up to 1810, so they never need to reach that rock bottom if they just wanted to open up their mind. Sorry, carry on, John. I had to release that.
No, you're right. So the thing is that there's two ways to learn: understanding or experience. You and I have always offered people understanding and intentionally have your way up, but very few people want to learn through understanding. Everybody ends up learning through experience. You can tell someone the stove is hot, or they can put their hand on the stove.
Yeah.
What I'm sharing with you is a thing called the Stras Howe generational theory. And if you go to like Wikipedia and look this up, they'll take you back to the 1400s. So they're looking at this over the whole earth. The whole earth goes through this type of thing. Okay. So the first stage they talk about is the high. This happens after a crisis. So we'll talk about a crisis. Institutions are strong and individuals are weak. They're all in flow. They're acting. You think about it, what this is saying is the institution is acting like an individual. Everything we've been talking about. The bigger system is looking like a person. Everybody's in flow to the point that the whole thing looks like one person and you don't see the individuals. A lot of people call that enlightenment. The drop of water that goes to the ocean. So this is the high, okay? Society is confident about the collective direction they're going. That's why they're in sync. Now, people outside the majority feel stifled by the conformity, but a high is when the whole country, the whole world is going one direction. This was, for the United States, this was 1946 to 1964. So right after World War II, all the way through the early 60s, the country was full steam ahead. Everything was going forward. Everybody knew what they were doing. The 50s were this, nostalgia era. Everything was going forward. That corresponds to what we call a 10 thought process. Well, what comes after the 10 is the 80. What comes after a high is an awakening. An awakening is when institutions are attacked because people want this personal spiritual authority. 80 is personal focus, personal control. People now in the system go, yeah, but I want to be in charge. I want to take over. So people are tired of the social discipline and they want to recapture a sense of self-awareness and their own identity.
Yeah.
What happens is it goes from this collective doing everything to boom, everybody wants to do whatever they want to do. This was 1964 to 1984. So that was a 20-year period. Again, these can be different amounts of time. That's an 80. Next would be the 160. The zombie period.
Yeah.
They call it the unraveling. And they say this is the opposite of the 10. And if you notice when we draw the square, because this is fractal, people go 10, 80, 160, 320, back up to 10. 10 is opposite of 160. Yep. What I'm talking about now is the opposite of the high or the 10. The unraveling. Institutions are weak and distrusted. Individuals are strong and flourishing. People want to atomize and just enjoy life. This was the 80s, 1980 to 2007, the 90s. This was, hey, the institutions are all over the place. Everything's in flow institutionally with the E type of stuff, the stock market and the tech bubble and all that stuff. All that stuff was going on. Everybody was kind of doing whatever they wanted to do. And so that's called the unraveling. The fourth turning is the crisis. This is destruction, war, revolution. Institutional life is destroyed and rebuilt in response to a perceived threat to a nation's survival.
Yep.
That started for us in 2008. This is the stage we're in. We had this global, this economic crisis, in 2008. We've had now this pandemic. We're only halfway through. We still have another 8 to 10 years to go. before we come out of this. And if you think of the previous high, what was the crisis back then? The crisis back then was 1929 to 1946. That was the Great Depression and World War II.
Yeah.
That's the period we're living in right now. We are living right now in the same global mentality as the Depression and World War II. And that's why you just see, like, people aren't going to get the shot. People don't trust the press. People don't trust. It's just everything is, there's a perceived threat. And again, perceived threat. And so everybody is just being destructive.
Yeah. Now, it's so funny that you speak about this, because as much as I'm learning from what you're saying, I have spoken about this type of stuff with my mother, believe it or not, who's server. And it was actually, she watched something years and years ago. So I was very young when she told me about this. I think I might have been 11 or 12. And it was something to do with a Russian program that she watched. There was a Russian leader talking about it, Mikhail Gorbachev or something like that. And he spoke about this. Now, at the moment, I believe we are going through the fourth industrial revolution, where everything's going to change. It's all going to turn electric and to do with frequencies and waves, as opposed to coal and, do you know, all the stuff, the miners, all the stuff. And people can look through and understand where they're going to be. Now, just while we'll go off topic and then go back onto it, at the moment, people think being let back out your house and going to the pub or going to the nightclubs is going to make them happy. But there's going to be more, and they don't realize it. And when you try and give people the truth, they don't like it. So they switch off to it, and then they moan. They're not willing to understand that this is what goes through. So when you're talking about, you know, the people not wanting to understand or going through that kind of unrest, there's going to be a massive backlash against the government. I would say in the next year to 18 months, in every country, it's like we've had enough, and it's going to be kind of almost like civil war type. You know, it might not be as much, it might be more digital nowadays because nobody's walking about with muskets and stuff. But I believe there's going to be a big backlash against it, which is going to take us off. Now, there was a thing called the Rockefeller Report that came out in 2010. And this is the global plan for everything to change. And there was a thing called Agenda 2030, is where everything comes back down to like a utopian way of living. But it's going to take that from 2008 all the way through till 2030 to put people through to get into this way of behavior. So it's very interesting.
So what I would say to summarize all that, and this would be my last thing, is that 2030 is kind of where this, 2028, 2030, that's where this is kind of, this cycle ends naturally.
Yeah.
So through experience, if we just go about everything just experientially, naturally, everything will be better 2028, 2030. But we're going to have to crash and hit bottom. It's going to have to be bad.
Yeah.
And that's what you're dealing with. Or we could, through understanding, reverse this. And so that's how you and I met. And that's how, this has really been my passion. I believe I have a model for the mind and brain, non-contradictory. No one else has it. And again, I've been very open to be challenged by anybody about this. And I feel very good about making, putting this all on record. And over the next, 7 to, 9 years, I think my theories are going to be proven out. I think my theories are going to eventually be embraced. Maybe because we have to go through every other theory and hit bottom, and then finally they'll embrace this. But I'm not going to be the one guilty for having offered this all along. All the people who haven't been spreading this, all the people that I've shared, and experts who have squashed this down, they're the guilty ones. And they're the ones who are going to have to live with this. And so this is really the place where I want to start sharing my story of how I know what I know and why no one else knows it. And when you understand my background, you understand my story, and you understand how I've tried to get information out to people all along and their response, you're going to know why I'm the only one still talking about this, because a lot of important people have had the information I will be sharing, and they have chosen intentionally not to share it. Not because they haven't chosen intentionally not to help other people, because they don't want to look wrong.
Yeah, no, and I get that. And you and I met because I was one of those people that was wanting to change the world, starting by a small group, person by person, to then go up to the bigger systems to be able to get to where you and I have a goal. I'll call it a focus. Call it a focus. And we want the world to change. That's what we want. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get to that single place. And you realise that when you ask me a question, this guy's not set in his ways, not so much easily influenced, but he's open. And that was the point where you and I shared that openness and it got us to where we can. If only people or all the people were all open, I know it's difficult and we're not asking for much to be fair, but if all people are open, that's where the change in the world would be because people would be open to change. They're being forced through change, through these revolutions and through these because they're not willing to work with, they're all working against and they're causing themselves the conflict and they don't even realize that the group as a collective is the problem. So as it's mega. So yeah, mind blowing video again, John. Thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take it easy.
Bye.